Alright everybody, today we're going to learn how to measure. Now there are quite a variety of measuring tools out there. You can get a yardstick, framing square, wooden ruler, a folding rule, tape measures. They come in a variety of lengths, 12 foot, 25 foot. You can get them pretty big depending on what you're building and how much you need in that tape measure. A couple 100 feet if you had to. Or small cabinet squares, even adjustable squares. So there's a variety of measuring tools out there, and they all have a standard system of sizing, and that's feet and inches. You have 12 inches and then all the fractions of the inch in the lines in between. First, let's talk about the system of measurement. The smallest increment really is the inch, and then there are fractions of the inch that get smaller. Larger than that, once you get to 12 inches, that's 1 foot. If you get to 3 feet, 3 feet is a yard. People will often use yards to measure large distances that are not quite a mile, because it's a big jump to go from 12 inches, which is a foot, to 5,280 feet being a mile. There's 1,760 yards in a mile, so people will often use yards to measure large things that a mile is just way too big. Most commonly, you would probably hear someone talk about yards on a football field. That's what we have here at the school. Or a golf course, which is also yards. But for the most part, people use feet to denote lengths, but then inches to do the fraction of the feet, and then fractions to do the parts of the inch. So for our purposes, for this course, we need to know the fractions of the inch, because if you're measuring something that's small, you might say, all right, it's 5 inches or 6 inches, but it's not exactly 5 or 6. It might be 5 3/8. You also need to know this even when you build houses. So you'll need to know this because anything that you measure with a tape measure doesn't usually come out to an exact inch. You have to know the fractions in between the inch. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, today we're going to talk about measuring with a ruler. So I got 2 here. This one has inches on one side and centimeters on the other side. We're not going to talk about centimeters. We're only going to talk about inches. So let's look at this. This is a 12-inch or 1 foot long ruler. 12 inches is 1 foot. However, it has absolutely nothing to do with feet, so don't get confused. It's just 12 inches equals a foot. But in between these inches, which are labeled with a number, 1, 2, 3, in between are all these small markings of varying heights, and they are the fractions of an inch. So we have 1 inch, we have 2 inches, but the large one in the middle is 1.5. The next size down, this size here and this size here, those are 1/4 inches. So this would be 1 1/4 inch, 1.5 inch, and 1 3/4 inch. If we go one smaller than that, these ones here, that's 1/8 of an inch. So we would have 1 1/8, 1 1/4, which is 2/8, 1 3/8, 4/8 is a half, 5/8, 6/8 is 3/4, 7/8, and then 2. The smallest line, right in between the eighth, right there, the tiniest line is 1/16 of an inch. That's the smallest increment on most of our rulers. Some go a little smaller, but that's really small. So this is a 1/16 of an inch. 1 1/16, and so on. If I were to draw it out for you, if that's 1 inch and that's 2 inches on a ruler, just like from here to here, like we were talking about before, that's your full inch. The large line down the middle is going to be 1/2. So we have 1 1/2. If we cut that 1/2 in half, so the middle between 1 1/2 is 1/4. Because 1/4 is this much. 2/4 is a half. But we don't write this measurement like this with 2/4. We write it in the simplest form, 1/2. The top number is always odd. It's never even, because that means it could be divided down. So this is 2/4 is a half, just like 2/4, 50 cents. Now we're gonna go here. And this is 3/4. 1 inch, quarter, 2/4 is a half, 3/4 up to 2. But now, when we cut that one in half, 1/2 of a quarter if we're gonna cut 1/4 in half, this one is 1/8. If this is 1/8 and this is 1/8, that means a quarter is also 2/8. But we don't write it like that. We write it like this, 1/4, not 2/8. And so on. One, 2, 3/8. 4/8 is a half, but we don't write it that. 4/8, 2/4, 1/2. 4, 5, 6/8. But we don't write it that way. We write it 3/4. 7/8. And then the full, which would be the equivalent to 8/8. But we don't write that. If we were to go one smaller than that, cut 1/8 of an inch in half, the smallest line on the ruler is going to be 1/16. And if that's 1/16 and that's 1/16, that means that an eighth is 2/16. And so on. One 1/16, 2/16 is an eighth, 3/16, 4/16, but we don't write it that way. We write it as a quarter. 5/16, 6, 7/16, 8, 9/16, 10, 11/16, 12/16, 13/16, 14/16, 15/16, and then 16/16 would be there. But again, these measurements are not what we don't use these. We have to simplify them. We simplify this up to the smallest fraction. So if we measured something that was 1 and 3/8, we would not write 6/16, we'd write 3/8. A quick way to remember all of this, other than just memorizing the position, these are all odd numbers on the top. 1, 1, 3, 1, 5, 3, 7, 9, 5, 11, 13, 7, 15. All odd numbers on the top. If they're even, they can be simplified. If you look at a ruler and you see that it's this small line right before the half, well, you know that the half, which is a big landmark on the ruler, very easy to see, really easy to identify that half line. If it's one smaller than that, well then looking at our chart here, here's our big half, 7/16. 8/16 would be the middle, 7/16 is the measurement. So these are the fractions of an inch, but you will not see them written on a ruler. The ruler will look just like this, and you have to know what those lines represent. And that's it. The easiest way is to memorize where those positions are on the ruler, so that when you look at it, because the sizing of the lines is all different, you'll memorize it, and then you'll just know what line is 5/8, what line is 7/16. You won't have to do any math or anything. We're not making this mathy. So we have some worksheets today. They're below. Make sure you do that assignment on Canvas. And that's it. Let's go to work.